The alarm was already screaming when I pulled myself out of my bunk. Not the soft proximity ping, not the yellow level hull warning. The full red alarm, the one that shakes the walls and makes your back teeth vibrate and means something has gone genuinely, catastrophically wrong. I had my boots on before my eyes were fully open. 11 years in the field teaches you that. You stop waiting to understand the situation before you move. Understanding comes later. Moving comes first. The corridor of the Harbinger was narrow and cold, the overhead lights cycling between white and red in that rhythm that always made me think of a heartbeat deciding whether to stop. I moved fast, bouncing off the wall at the junction, heading for the bridge, already running through the list of things that could trigger a full red alert on a salvage vessel 14 hours past the edge of map space. Drive failure, hull breach, collision. I did not have crew malfunction on that list. I should have. Kowalski was standing at the central console when I got there. Owen Kowalski, 22 years old, soft hands, the kind of face that still looked surprised when bad things happened. He had been with us for 6 weeks. His previous job had involved sorting cargo manifests on a station that had never once left orbit. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the viewport. I looked at the viewport. The structure outside had not been there 20 minutes ago. That was not possible, and yet there it was, taking up the entire forward view the way a wall takes up the view when you walk into it in the dark. Except this wall was the size of a small moon. Except this wall was made of something that was not metal and was not stone, and was not any material in any database I had ever read. It had a color that kept shifting at the edges, like the light itself was not sure how to bounce off it. And it was lit up. Every surface of it. Millions of points of pale gold light, running in patterns too deliberate to be random and too vast to be decorative. Like a city coming back to life after a very long night. I said, Kowalski. He said, I barely touched it. I said, Kowalski. He said there was a panel. It was glowing. I thought it was a navigation beacon. I counted to 3 inside my head. This is a technique I learned after Europa, when I realized that my first response to catastrophic stupidity was always something I would later regret saying out loud. You touched an unidentified panel on an uncharted structure, I said. That appeared on no survey map, no chart, and no recorded mission log in the history of human deep space exploration. It was very small, he said. The structure lit up another 10,000 points of light while he was saying it. Petra Cole was already at the scanner station, pulling data with both hands moving fast. Petra was our system's lead, 38, originally from Bristol, the sort of person who stayed calm during emergencies because she found emergencies more interesting than frightening. She had worked salvage for 15 years and had the scar on her chin to prove it was not a boring profession. I'm getting mass readings, she said. This thing is roughly the diameter of a mid-sized moon. Composition is not matching anything in the database. The interior is, she paused. Petra never paused. The interior is hollow, mostly. There are structures inside, organized structures, thousands of them. What kind of structures? Chambers, she said, each one the same size, each one sealed, stacked in rows from the core outward. Another pause. There are a lot of rows. How many chambers? She looked at the number on her screen. She looked at me. 17,000 and change, she said. The Harbinger had a crew of 9. I pulled up the comm panel and started a transmission to Earth Command. The delay at this distance was going to be close to 40 minutes each way. I began recording. This is Sergeant First Class Dara Akeffer, attached to salvage vessel Harbinger, operating under contract reference 774-Alpha. We have encountered an uncharted large-scale structure at coordinates attached to this transmission. The structure appears to be artificial, appears to be actively responding to contact, and contains an estimated 17,000 or more sealed interior chambers. We are requesting immediate guidance and backup. We are not, under any circumstances, touching anything else. I looked at Kowalski when I said the last sentence. He looked at his hands. The structure groaned. Not a mechanical sound, not the sound of metal under stress. Something older than that, the way a mountain would sound if mountains had voices and had been holding their breath for longer than human civilization had existed. It came through the hull of the Harbinger, through the floor plates, through the soles of my boots, and sat inside my chest like a second heartbeat. Then the doors opened. Not one, not a row, not a section. 17,000 doors opened at the same time, each one folding back with the slow deliberateness of something that has never once needed to hurry. The sound of it was not loud. It was enormous, which is a different thing entirely. The gold light inside the structure intensified. Petra's hands had stopped moving on the console. That had never happened before in any emergency I had witnessed involving Petra Cole. "Dara," she said. "I see it." "Dara." I said, "I see it." Every comm channel we had, every frequency, every band from navigational to emergency to deep space diplomatic, lit up at once. The sound that came through all of them simultaneously was not a language. It was not a signal pattern. It was something the translation software took 11 seconds to even begin processing, and when it finished its first pass at the result, it produced a single line of text in uncertain italics, with a footnote that said the word order might be inverted, and the emotional weight of the original was not fully captured. The line read, "Allegiance confirmed." I stood in the middle of my bridge, 9-person salvage crew behind me, red lights still cycling, and I read those 2 words 3 times. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, the left one, the one I always kept close, and I touched the folded papers there. I did not take them out. I just touched them. Discharge paperwork, signed, dated, 3 days. I had been 3 days from done. The first one stepped out of the vault. I want to be precise about this, because imprecision would be an injustice to the moment. It did not emerge the way a person emerges from a room. It did not walk out, or step down, or stride forward. It moved the way tectonic plates move, with the absolute settled weight of something that rearranges the landscape just by existing in it. 9 feet tall, armor that looked less like something worn and more like something grown, covering every surface in plates of a material that caught the gold light and held it, the way deep water holds light without ever fully giving it back. The face was not human. The proportions were not human. But the eyes, when they fixed on the viewport of the Harbinger, on me through the viewport, were the eyes of something that had been awake for a very long time and was now done pretending to sleep. It looked at our ship. It looked at the 9 of us, visible through the forward glass. It looked at me. And it went down on one knee. Behind it, from 17,000 open doors, the sound of that motion repeated. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Each one settling into the same position, the same slow, cert, 200,000-year-old acknowledgement. The bridge was silent. Kowalski behind me said, in a very small voice, "I'm really sorry about the panel." I did not say anything. My discharge papers were still in my pocket. 3 days. I had 3 days left on this contract, and then I was done and I was going home, and none of this was supposed to happen. My hands were in my jacket pockets. I had expected them to shake. They were not shaking. That was the part that frightened me most. Part 2, I did not sign up for this. Literally, I unsigned. The first transmission back from Earth Command arrived 39 minutes after I sent mine. 1 word. Hello. Not who, not what is your status, not stand by for instruction. Just how, sitting alone on the message line like Earth Command had looked at my full report, at the coordinates, at the mass readings Petra attached, at the translator's uncertain italics, and the single most coherent response the entire communications department could produce was a four-letter question that my 12-year-old cousin could have sent. I recorded my reply. "That is not the guidance I requested," I said. "Please try again." Then I turned around and looked at the situation. The situation was this. 17,000 soldiers of a species that predated human civilization were kneeling outside my ship on the hull of a structure the size of a moon, waiting. They had been waiting for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. They were not impatient. They were not restless. They had the stillness of things that measured time in epochs and found minutes too small to bother with. The largest one, the one that had come out first, was still at the front. I had started calling it Gerald in my head. I could not explain why. It had the bearing of a Gerald. Something about the way it held its posture, like a very senior administrator who had personally witnessed the rise and fall of several civilizations, and was prepared to witness several more without losing composure. "We need to know if this structure has any communication interface," I told Petra. "Working on it," she said. She had recovered her usual operational pace, fingers moving across 3 screens at once, pulling schematics from the structure's own output signals. The structure was broadcasting constantly, a slow and detailed stream of information that Petra described as a technical manual the size of a planet. "How long to translate?" "At current processing speed, 80 years give or take." "Narrow it down." "Working on it," she said again, in the tone that meant she had already been narrowing it down before I asked. Nate Cooper was at the secondary comm array. Nate was our communications specialist, 29, originally from Edinburgh, the sort of person who approached impossible technical problems with the cheerful energy of someone who had never once considered that impossible was a category that applied to him personally. "I'm picking up a structure in the broadcast signal," he said. "It's repeating. There's a root vocabulary buried in the signal layer. It looks like the structure has been broadcasting a translation key the entire time it was dormant, like it knew someone was eventually going to need to talk to it and left a dictionary on the doorstep." "How long has it been broadcasting?" Nate checked, looked up. "Based on the signal decay patterns, about 200,000 years." The room was quiet for a moment. "So it's been sitting here," Kowalski said slowly, "broadcasting instructions for talking to it, for 200,000 years, waiting for someone to show up." "Yes," Nate said. "And we showed up." "You showed up," I said. "You specifically, because you touched the panel." Kowalski sat down in the nearest chair and stared at the floor with the expression of a man, beginning to understand the full weight of what he had accidentally started. Using Nate's translation key, we established a basic communication channel with Gerald within 2 hours. It was not a smooth process. Gerald's communication method involved a combination of light patterns emitted from the armor surface, subsonic vibration, and what Nate eventually identified as a form of encoded compressed data transmission that human vocal cords could not produce and human ears could not fully receive. The best our translator could manage was a 73% approximation of meaning, which Gerald indicated was acceptable. Gerald indicated this by doing nothing, which the translator interpreted as neutral acknowledgement, which in Gerald's culture apparently meant the same thing as a thumbs up. The first thing Gerald did, once communication was established, was request a full tactical assessment of humanity's military capability. I thought about this for approximately 4 seconds, decided that refusing to answer would take longer to explain than just answering, and authorized Petra to pull our publicly available military records. Gerald received the data. Gerald was silent for a long time. Then Gerald produced a new light pattern that the translator rendered as, "These are the weapons you use most frequently." "Yes," I said. "Same weapon, used multiple times, same day." "That's called ammunition," I said. The weapon is reusable. You reload it. Gerald's light patterns shifted. Nate said this indicated something between deep fascination and polite structural confusion. They have these weapons in large numbers, Gerald transmitted. Millions, I said. Gerald processed this. In the ancient wars, the Velkari, which was what Gerald's kind called themselves, had used weapons once. Each weapon was a singular event, designed for a singular purpose. The concept of a weapon you could use, reload, and use again appeared to be, for Gerald, roughly equivalent to discovering that someone had invented a new color. Show him the tank, Kowalski said. We are not showing him the tank. The tank is impressive. We are not using Earth's armor vehicle catalog as a show-and-tell exercise, Kowalski. But Gerald had already picked up on the mention of an unspecified heavy ground vehicle through Nate's translation feed, and the light patterns were indicating a request for more information. And I spent the next 40 minutes explaining mechanized ground warfare to a 9-foot soldier who had been asleep since before humanity invented the wheel. Gerald found the wheel especially interesting. The idea that humans had built an entire civilization of transportation around a rotating circular shape, and then put that shape on everything from farm equipment to starships, was the sort of information that Gerald's light patterns suggested had not come up in 200,000 years of previous tactical experience. We also explained the internet. That took longer. 2 hours into the debrief, while Gerald was processing a summary of human digital communication networks with the focused attention of a scholar who had just found a very unusual fossil, Petra flagged me from across the bridge. I moved to her station. On her screen was a sensor return from deep space, 312,000 kilometers out and closing at military deceleration speed. Not one ship, not a patrol, a formation. The kind of formation you use when you want to arrive somewhere with sufficient force to make the conversation short. Voth, Petra said. I had never heard the name before that moment. She pointed to a secondary screen, where Nate had cross-referenced the ship design signature against the Velkari's own translated historical files. The Voth, a name that appeared in the Velkari records roughly as often as the word enemy appears in a war manual. How long have they been there? I said. Long enough, Petra said. Their deceleration profile means they were already moving toward this location before we arrived. They were watching the structure, waiting to see if anyone opened it. And someone opened it. Someone opened it, she said, and we both looked at Kowalski. Kowalski was still talking to Gerald about the internet. Estimated arrival, I said. 48 hours if they maintain current deceleration. 48 hours. I went back to my station. I pulled up Gerald's channel. Gerald, I said, I need to ask you something. The light patterns shifted to indicate attention. The Voth, are they a problem? Gerald's response came back through the translator, with a note that the translator had flagged several words as requiring contextual disambiguation, but the core meaning was clear enough. The Voth, the translator rendered, were the reason the Velkari had built the vault in the first place. The Velkari had not gone to sleep because they were tired. They had gone to sleep because the cost of staying awake was a war that would have burned half the galaxy, and their last commander had made a choice. Sleep. Wait. Let the right person come. Let the right person wake them up. And the right person, I said carefully, is identified how exactly? Gerald produced a long sequence of light patterns. The translator worked on it for 17 seconds, which was the longest it had ever taken. The translation it returned said, by being the one the allegiance confirmed for. I sat with that for a moment. And if the Voth reach us before we're ready? Gerald's light patterns were brief, simple. The translator returned 3 words, then we are ready. I looked at the screen showing the Voth formation, 48 hours, 312,000 kilometers and closing. Then I looked at Earth Command's second transmission, which had just arrived. It said a general is being dispatched. Do not take independent action. Await official command transfer. I read it twice. Then I walked Gerald through the concept of a bureaucratic chain of command. Gerald's light patterns, for the first time since waking up, indicated something the translator could only describe as bewilderment. It was somehow a comfort. We were 47 hours from the Voth arrival when General Arthur Kane of Earth Command came aboard the Harbinger in his dress uniform. With 4 aides, a communications officer, and a prepared speech on a data card. He was 56. He had the posture of a man who had spent decades being photographed. He had medals on his chest that Petra later identified as including 3 for administrative excellence. He walked onto the bridge. He looked at Gerald through the viewport. Gerald looked back at him. Arthur Kane began his prepared speech. Gerald did not move, did not produce a single light pattern, did not shift 1 centimeter of posture. The 17,000 Valkyrie behind Gerald also did not move. Kane finished his speech. He stood straight. He looked at Gerald with the expression of a man accustomed to rooms responding when he spoke. Gerald looked at me. Just me. The entire army, every one of them, light patterns synchronizing, attention shifting in 1 single unified movement. All of them. Looking at me. Kane turned around slowly. I was already reaching for my comm channel. Gerald, I said, situation report now. Part 3, fine, we do it my way. God help everyone. I did not make a speech. Kane wanted a speech. He had suggestions about tone, about projecting authority, about what it meant symbolically for humanity to assume command of an ancient army. He had written 3 paragraphs that he wanted me to deliver over the open channel to the Valkyrie. I read the 3 paragraphs. I handed the data card back to him. No, I said. He stared at me. People of Kane's rank were not accustomed to that word from people of mine. Sergeant Akafer, he began. Gerald, I said into the comm channel, ignoring Kane entirely. I need a complete breakdown of Voth fleet formation and engagement patterns, historical data from your records, anything you have on their tactical preferences. I need it in the next 2 hours. Gerald's light patterns responded immediately, focused, organized. The Valkyrie around him shifted into visible activity for the first time since they had knelt. They were good at waiting. They were better at working. Kane was still behind me. I could feel him deciding how to respond to being ignored by a sergeant in front of his aides. I turned around, which is a technique I find useful because it forces the conversation to be direct. General Kane, I said, you have 46 hours before a Voth attack fleet arrives at this position. The Valkyrie will not respond to your authority. I cannot explain why in terms that will be satisfying to you. What I can tell you is that we have a limited window to prepare a defense using the most capable military force in recorded history, and the 2 options are to use that window or to lose it. He looked at me for a long time. You are a salvage contractor, he said. I was a salvage contractor, I said. Currently, I appear to be something else. I suggest we work with what is true rather than what either of us would prefer. He did not like that. He made his feelings about it clear for approximately 4 more minutes. Then he retreated to the secondary conference room with his aides, and I turned back to the console, and I got to work. Gerald's historical data on the Voth came through faster than I expected. It was substantial. 200,000 years of conflict, documented in the Valkyrie's meticulous archive, translated through Nate's key at about 60% accuracy, but with enough structural clarity to build a picture. The Voth were methodical, patient. They planned operations across timescales that made human strategic thinking look like someone writing a grocery list. They did not rush. They did not improvise. That was the first useful thing I found. They had counter-protocols for every Valkyrie engagement pattern in the historical record. Every formation, every approach, every tactical signature the Valkyrie had used in 200,000 years of warfare, the Voth had a documented response for. They had spent the time since the Valkyrie went to sleep doing what methodical, patient enemies do when given enough time. They had prepared. For the Valkyrie. For the army they knew. They had no protocol for what the army had become in the past 48 hours. They had no protocol for us. I was thinking about this, standing at my console with a cold cup of something Nate called coffee and I called optimism, when Kowalski appeared at my elbow. Kowalski had, over the past 2 days, gone from being the person who started all of this by accident to being a sort of unofficial liaison between the Harbinger crew and Gerald, primarily because Gerald had developed what could only be described as a scholarly interest in everything Kowalski said. Kowalski was a source of new information in a way that Gerald found genuinely compelling, which was either a testament to Kowalski's natural curiosity or evidence that 200,000 years of isolation lowered the bar considerably. I had an idea, Kowalski said. No, I said. You haven't heard it. You touched a glowing panel on an alien structure and started all of this. Your ideas are not a resource I am currently mining. What if we pretended to surrender? He said. I looked at him. The Voth are methodical, he said. Their protocols are about matching patterns. They're going to expect the Valkyrie to fight back the way they always fought back, right? So what if instead of doing that, we signal a retreat first, draw them into a specific approach vector, then close the formation behind them? He pulled up a hand-drawn diagram on his personal tablet. It was not a sophisticated diagram. It had circles and arrows, and one shape that I believed was meant to be the Harbinger. I looked at the diagram. I looked at Kowalski. I looked at the diagram again. Then I called Gerald. Gerald, I said, I need to ask you something. In your entire history of conflict with the Voth, have you ever used a feigned retreat as a tactical opening? Gerald's light patterns came back fast. The translator produced a single word. No. Has any force you are aware of ever used a feigned retreat against the Voth? A longer pause. No. Because it would be deceptive, I said. The translator worked for a moment on Gerald's response and returned. Deception in warfare is not a concept present in Valkyrie tactical doctrine. All engagements are direct. All positions are declared. I looked at Kowalski. Kowalski said carefully, so they've been fighting the most patient and prepared enemy in the galaxy for 200,000 years, and they've been doing it completely honestly the whole time. Apparently. He thought about it. That's kind of noble, also probably why the war never ended. I got back on the channel. Gerald, I need you to explain the concept of a fake retreat to your people. Not because we are going to lie about our values or our intentions, but because the Voth have a counter-protocol for everything the Valkyrie have ever done, and we need to do something they have no counter-protocol for. Gerald was silent for 11 seconds. Then the light pattern shifted. The translator said, with more confidence than usual, explain this fake. I put Kowalski on the channel. He explained it for 22 minutes. He used analogies involving card games, sports, and one extended comparison to a cooking competition show that I was not sure translated well through Nate's key, but that Gerald appeared to engage with deeply. When Kowalski finished, Gerald produced the longest unbroken sequence of light patterns I had seen from him yet. Nate translated it in sections, flagging 3 words as culturally untranslatable and 2 phrases as possibly indicating a revision of fundamental operational doctrine. The core of what Gerald said was this: in 200,000 years, no enemy had ever expected the Velkari to do something they had never done. The Voth's entire strategic framework was built on the premise that the Velkari were predictable. They were predictable because they were honorable, and they were honorable because no one had ever suggested to them that the two things were different. I had not suggested they were different. I had suggested that protecting the people behind you sometimes meant doing things the enemy would not expect. That, Gerald's light patterns indicated, in a translation Nate said he was 89% confident in, was a new idea. We had 31 hours left when the Voth fleet reached engagement distance. The Velkari moved to formation on my order. 17,000 soldiers, across a front that stretched wider than most planetary systems, forming up with the precision of something that had rehearsed this exact motion for longer than human history. The sight of it on Petra's long-range scanner was the kind of thing that makes you briefly aware of how small a ship named Harbinger actually was. The Voth fleet advanced in its methodical pattern. Counter-protocol formation, standard anti-Velkari approach, exactly as the historical records described. Gerald, I said, fall back slowly, let them push. The light patterns came back, confirmed. The Velkari retreated. I want to be clear about what it looked like from the Voth side, because from the Voth side, the army that had never once retreated in 200,000 years of warfare was retreating. I can only imagine what their analysts were doing in those first 30 seconds. I imagine a lot of checking and rechecking of data. I imagine the specific confusion of a system encountering an input it was not built to process. The Voth pushed forward, into the gap, into the formation that closed behind them while they were still looking at what was ahead. The engagement lasted 19 minutes. I am not going to describe the details, because some things deserve the quiet that comes after them rather than a thorough accounting. What I will say is that 19 minutes was faster than any engagement in the Velkari historical record. Gerald confirmed this. The previous fastest engagement in their archive had lasted 6 days. The Voth fleet retreated. Most of it. There was a moment, after the last Voth ship jumped to faster than light and the scanner cleared, when the bridge of the Harbinger was completely silent. 8 people standing in the red cycling light that had never stopped cycling, looking at a clear screen that had been full of enemy signatures 3 minutes ago. Nate broke the silence by exhaling. Petra said, confirmed withdrawal, no Voth signatures within sensor range. Kowalski sat down on the floor, not in a chair, just directly on the floor, with the relieved gracelessness of someone whose legs had stopped taking instructions. I stood at my console. The comm channel with Gerald was still open. Before I could speak, a single light pattern came through, short, specific, different from anything the translator had produced before. Nate looked at his screen, looked at me. What does it say? I said. Nate read it twice. It says, he said carefully, we did not come for the army, we came to see who woke them, now we know. I had been holding the edge of my console, without realizing it. I let go. That was a Voth transmission, I said. They sent that before they jumped. Yes, Nate said. The bridge was quiet again. So this wasn't their real fleet, Petra said. It was not a question. Nobody answered it anyway. Part 4, turns out I'm the weapon. The second Voth transmission arrived 6 hours after the fleet jumped out. Nate had been monitoring the residual frequencies, running signal analysis on the background noise. The Voth fleet left behind the way ships always leave behind a trace if you know what to look for. He found it buried in the noise, compressed into a format that was not meant for our translator, but that the Velkari communication system Gerald had been syncing with ours could read. He brought it to me without saying anything first. That was how I knew it was the kind of information that needed to sit in front of you before it was explained. The transmission, once Gerald confirmed the translation, said three things. The first thing was that the fleet we had just driven off was a reconnaissance force, 1/8 of the total Voth military presence in this region. The second thing was that the full fleet was 3 days out, running without deceleration, which meant it was not planning to stop for conversation. The third thing was the one Nate had not wanted to explain before I read it myself. It said, "We know what follows the one who wakes the old army. We have been waiting for this commander. When the right person woke them, we were always going to come. We have something older than the Velkari, and it is already moving." I read it 3 times. Then I called Gerald. Gerald had been expecting the call. The light pattern started before I finished opening the channel. He talked for a long time. Nate translated in pieces, pausing to flag the sections where the historical context made translation technically possible but emotionally insufficient, where the words in Gerald's language carried 200,000 years of weight that did not fit cleanly into any human equivalent. Here is what Gerald told me. The Velkari were not built. They were not a species that evolved and chose to become soldiers. They were an army created specifically, engineered across generations by a civilization that no longer existed for a purpose that had always been the same. They were made to follow one thing, not a species, not a government, not an ideology. A profile, a specific set of characteristics that their creators had determined through mathematics and history, and a discipline of knowledge that Gerald did not have words for in any translatable language, would always produce the right kind of commander at the right kind of moment. The algorithm, if you could call it that, had been embedded in the vault's awakening mechanism from the beginning. The kneeling was not ceremony, it was recognition. The system had scanned us the moment the panel was touched. It had scanned every person on the Harbinger. It had run its assessment in the 11 seconds between the doors opening and the first Velkari stepping out. It had found one match. "What are the criteria?" I said. Gerald produced a long sequence of light patterns. The translator worked on it, then produced a list. Tactically flexible under pressure, capable of using loss as a tool rather than a wound, no interest in recognition, instinct toward protecting others that outweighs instinct toward self-preservation, has survived a defining moment of catastrophic failure and continued functioning. I read the list. "Functioning," I said, "that's a specific word." Gerald's light patterns indicated confirmation. Not thriving, not recovering, functioning. "Because the profile is not someone who came through the worst thing whole," I said. Gerald's response came back. "The profile is someone who came through the worst thing and kept moving anyway. Wholeness is not the requirement. Continuation is." I was quiet for a moment. On the console in front of me, Petra had pulled up a preliminary analysis of the Voth's full fleet composition based on the data embedded in the second transmission. The numbers were significant, not impossible, but significant. "Gerald," I said, "what did they bring that stopped you last time?" This was the part of the conversation I had been waiting for since the second transmission arrived. Gerald's light patterns shifted, not uncertainty, not hesitation. The specific shift that Nate had identified early on as Gerald choosing precision over speed, making sure each word carried exactly the weight it was meant to carry. The translation came back in sections. The Voth had, in the period between the vault ceiling and now, recovered something. Not built it, recovered it, from a civilization even older than the Velkari's creators. A weapon system that did not function through firepower or formation or the physical superiority that the Velkari carried in their design. It functioned through negation. It was built to cancel the Velkari's specific capacities, their armor, their communications, their coordination. Strip those things away, and what remained was still 17,000 of the most capable individual soldiers in recorded history, but fighting without the network that made them an army rather than a crowd. It made you fight alone, I said. Gerald's confirmation was immediate. Did it work? A pause. The last commander sealed the vault instead of fighting, Gerald's translation said. She determined that fighting under negation was possible, but the cost was not survivable for the civilization behind us. So she chose to wait. I sat with that. She chose to wait for someone who could find a different answer. Kane knocked on the bridge door at that point, which was genuinely impressive timing in the worst possible way. He came in with his senior aide, and a communication from Earth Command that had apparently been 3 rounds of committee review, which I could tell because it was 11 paragraphs long and said almost nothing. The core of it was this: Earth Command wanted the Velkari deployed under Earth's military structure for the engagement, reporting through Kane, with Kane as official commanding officer, with me as a tactical advisor. I read it twice. Then I read the part about tactical advisor a 3rd time. Kane watched me reading. I understand this is an unusual situation, he said, and his voice had something in it that was different from the first day, something that was not quite humility but was in the same neighborhood. And I understand that the Velkari have established a clear response pattern toward your authority. But the political structure here matters. If we defeat this fleet under an unofficial command, the legal standing of the aftermath becomes complicated. The political structure, I said. Yes. 3 days, I said. We have 3 days before a fleet arrives with a weapon specifically designed to strip the Velkari of their coordinated combat capacity and force them to fight as individuals. And you want to discuss legal standing. I want to discuss command structure, he said. The command structure is whoever Gerald listens to, I said, which has been established clearly and repeatedly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the expression of a man doing something he had not planned to do and was not going to explain fully, he sat down in the nearest chair and said, "Then tell me what you need." That was the moment I decided Kane was more useful than I had initially assessed. Not a field commander, not someone who understood the operational reality we were sitting inside, but someone who understood the larger system, who knew how to make Earth Command move when it needed to move, and who had apparently decided that winning was more important than the precise location of the credit. I told him what I needed. He started making calls. The conversation with Gerald that evening was the longest we had. Nate translated for 4 hours straight, stopping twice to recalibrate the translation key against new vocabulary Gerald was introducing. Words the translator had never encountered because they described concepts no one had needed to describe to a human before. Gerald talked about the Velkari's last commander. Not as a memorial, as data, as context. Her name, in the translator's best approximation, sounded like a held breath, a sound humans could not fully make. Gerald's light patterns when he said it were the deepest blue the armor had produced, and Nate said quietly that he believed blue in the Velkari pattern language was the closest thing to grief. She had led them for 60,000 years. She had fought more wars than human civilization had existed through. She had made decisions that preserved species and ended empires, and drawn the lines that the rest of the galaxy had lived inside without knowing the lines were there. And she had ended by making the one decision that could not be undone, the one that could not be taken back, the one where the cost of choosing wrong was not her death, but everyone else's. She chose to wait. And she was right, I said. Gerald's light pattern shifted. The translator said, she was right that the answer was not yet present. She could not know whether the answer would come. She chose the possibility over the certainty. That is the defining quality of the profile she left the vault to find. I understood then. Not an insight, not a revelation, just a thing settling into place that had been trying to settle for a long time. The profile was not looking for the best possible version of a commander. It was looking for someone who had already been through the moment where everything went wrong, where the cost came out of the people around you, where you survived something that you hadn't finished understanding yet, and who had kept functioning anyway. Not healed, not resolved, functioning. I pulled out the discharge papers that evening, in the small cabin I had been sleeping in when none of this had started yet. I sat on the edge of the bunk with them in my hands, reading through the formal language of a process I had started because I was done. Done leading people somewhere they didn't come back from. Done being the one who kept functioning while the people around her stopped. I had spent 11 years calling it pragmatism, and 2 years calling it survival, and 3 months calling it a decision I was at peace with. Gerald had named it in one sentence, without being asked, without explanation. You stopped leading because the ones you led stopped existing. I folded the papers carefully, put them back in my pocket, did not throw them away. Not yet. The Voth full fleet arrived in sensor range 17 hours earlier than projected. They were not decelerating. Part 5, we don't reschedule this one. The scanner return hit Petra's console at 3 in the morning, ship time. She did not hesitate, did not calculate the odds of the reading being an error. She hit the alert and had me on comms before I was standing. I was on the bridge in 4 minutes. The screen showed the Voth fleet in clean, terrible detail. Not the formation from the first engagement. Not a reconnaissance pattern. This was everything. The full weight of a military that had been preparing for one specific moment for 200,000 years, arriving at that moment with the specific calm of patience finally becoming permission. Petra put the count on screen. I looked at it. Gerald already knows, Nate said. The Velkari picked up the signature before we did. What's his status? Waiting on you. I stood at the console. Kane was already on the bridge, still in the jacket he had apparently not taken off. He looked at the screen and did not speak, which was the most useful thing he had done since arriving. I reached into my jacket pocket. The discharge papers were there, folded, edges worn from the number of times I had reached in and touched them over the past 11 years without taking them out. The habit of a person who needed to know the exit was still there, who needed to know the way out had not closed. I took them out this time, held them for a moment. Then I reached across to Kowalski's console and used his lighter, the one he kept clipped to his station for reasons I had never investigated. The papers caught badly, burned sideways the way paper always does when it is not meant to burn dramatically. There was nothing cinematic about it. It took longer than it should have. I had to hold the corner and wait. Kane watched. Kowalski watched. Nate watched. Gerald, through the viewport, with 17,000 soldiers behind him, watched. When it was done, I set the small remains in the empty coffee cup on my console and opened the channel. Gerald, full formation. I want the negation weapon located before they're in range. Everything else waits until we have that position. The light patterns came back instantly. The Velkari moved. Watching 17,000 soldiers shift into combat formation at full capacity, with no hesitation, no lag, no hierarchy of authorization to climb through, was the kind of thing that rearranged your understanding of what the word ready meant. They did not form up the way human forces formed up, with the inevitable 30 seconds of individuals sinking to the group. They moved like a single thought expressed in 17,000 bodies. I had 2 hours before the Voth reached engagement range. I spent the first 40 minutes working through the tactical problem with Gerald. The negation weapon was the priority. Everything else in the Voth fleet was manageable. The Velkari at full capacity were not simply superior in firepower. They were superior in the absolute categorical way that made the word superior feel insufficient. The math of this engagement, absent the negation weapon, was not close. With it, the math changed into something more honest and more dangerous. Where would they position it? I said. Gerald's answer was immediate. Protected formation center. Always. The Voth doctrine for the negation weapon was the same in every historical engagement. It was their most valuable asset, which meant they treated it with the caution of something irreplaceable. Central position. Maximum surrounding protection. The assumption that no force would be able to penetrate far enough to reach it before the weapon was active. They built their whole fleet around protecting it, I said. Confirmed it. So they expect us to go around it, or through the edges. Confirmed it. What if we go directly at it first? Gerald's light patterns paused. I continued. Not the main formation, a small group, fast, before the weapon activates. The Voth doctrine assumes no one targets it directly because no one has ever been able to reach it directly. The protection is oriented outward, against a force coming through the edge of the formation. Gerald's light patterns shifted through 3 colors in 2 seconds. Nate, watching the translation screen, said quietly, "He's consulting the archive. Real time. He's cross-referencing every historical engagement." I waited. Gerald's response came back in a long sequence that Nate translated piece by piece. No force had ever attempted direct approach to the negation weapon in any recorded engagement. The Voth's central protection was dense and layered, but it was built on the assumption of an outer engagement first. It was not built for the possibility that someone would simply ignore the outer engagement entirely and drive straight for the center. Because no one had ever had something fast enough to do it before the weapon activated. "Do we have something fast enough?" I said. The translation came back. There are 8 Velkari whose individual combat capacity and speed exceed anything the Voth's central protection was designed to stop. They were not part of historical formation doctrine because their role was always reserve. They have never been used as a first strike. "Because that would be reckless," I said. Confirmed it. "I need 8 reckless soldiers," I said, "and I need them to move the moment the Voth formation commits to standard engagement approach, before the weapon has a targeting solution, before they expect anything." Gerald was quiet for 7 seconds. "Then who leads the 8? I did not answer right away. The screen showed the Voth fleet, 17 hours out now, moving without any signal, without any transmission, with the flat certainty of something that had already decided how this ended. I thought about the last commander, the one who had held the line for 60,000 years and then made the only choice that kept the galaxy intact, who had chosen to wait instead of spend the last of everything, who had put all of it in the vault and trusted the math that said the right person would eventually come. She had not been whole when she made that choice. The records Gerald had shared made that clear. She had been carrying everything she had ever lost, which after 60,000 years was an inventory that no human language had the numbers for. She had been carrying it, and she had kept moving anyway. Not healed, not resolved. Functioning. "I lead them," I said. Kane looked at me. Nate looked at me. Kowalski looked at me from the floor, which is where he had been sitting for the past hour, because he said the chair made him feel like something was going to happen to it. I opened the crew channel. "This is Akafer. The plan is simple. The Voth fleet has one asset that changes the math of this engagement. We are going to remove it before it activates. 8 Velkari, myself, moving directly through the Voth central formation while the main Velkari force holds their attention at the engagement perimeter. We hit the negation weapon before they know we're there. After that, Gerald runs the rest." Silence on the channel. Then Nate said, "Confirmed." Then Petra said, "Confirmed. I have your back on sensors." Then Kowalski, still on the floor, said, Confirmed. Also, I'm sorry again about the panel. I almost said something to him. I let it go. The engagement began 12 hours later. The Voth fleet advanced in the precise formation Gerald's historical records had described. Outer protective layers first, negation weapon at center, flanked by the densest concentration of defensive ships in the formation. Standard doctrine, every variable in their pattern accounted for. Except one. The moment the Voth outer formation committed to its engagement approach, locked into the pattern, the moment their attention and targeting were oriented outward to meet the Velkari main force, I moved. 8 soldiers and 1 sergeant from Chicago, cutting through the Voth formation from the direction no one had ever come from before. What followed was not clean. Nothing real ever is. The Voth's central protection was not as unprepared as the tactic assumed, because the Voth were not stupid, and the moment their pattern recognition identified something wrong, it adapted. 3 of the 8 Velkari took significant damage. 1 fell and was recovered by another, and I can tell you that the sight of a 9-foot soldier carrying a 9-foot soldier through a combat zone, while still fighting, is something that does not fit into any category of experience I had filed away from previous operations. I took a hit. I want to be straightforward about this. Not dramatic. A structural impact that put me against the hull of a Voth defensive ship hard enough to knock the operational clarity out of my head for approximately 4 seconds. I was aware of the floor. I was aware of my hands. I was aware that I was still moving. I stood up. I gave the order. The 8 Velkari hit the negation weapon from 3 directions simultaneously. The weapon activated for 6 seconds. In those 6 seconds, the Velkari main force felt it. Gerald told me later, every individual soldier experienced the loss of the network, the sudden isolation, the silence where the coordination had been. He said it was like losing a sense you had never known you relied on until it was gone. For 6 seconds. Then the weapon was gone, and the network came back, and Gerald gave his own order. The second part of the engagement lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I was sitting on the hull of one of the 8 Velkari ships when it ended. Not dramatically, not intentionally. I had sat down because my legs had submitted a reasonable request to stop holding me up, and I had approved it. The scanner showed the Voth fleet in retreat, not a tactical withdrawal, not a regrouping pattern. Retreat. Gerald's channel opened. The light patterns were unlike anything I had seen from him before. Not the blue of grief, not the focused amber of tactical communication. Something that Nate, when I asked him later, said he could only translate as the light patterns of a thing returning to itself after a very long time away. He said, "It is done." I said, "For now." He said, "Yes, for now." That was the honest version. The Voth were not finished. An empire built across 200,000 years did not end in 1 engagement or 3 days or 1 person removing 1 weapon. There were going to be more transmissions, more fleets, more conversations that Nate would translate for hours while Gerald chose precision over speed. There was a lot of work left. I sat on the hull and looked at the stars. They looked the same as they always did, which was its own kind of information. The universe does not rearrange itself to acknowledge what you have just been through. It just continues, and you continue inside it. Kane transmitted from the Harbinger. He had the presence of mind to keep it brief. Earth Command is requesting a full debrief and strategy session, whenever you're ready. Give me an hour, I said. He gave me an hour without argument, which I was going to remember about him. I sat with the stars. I thought about my apartment in Chicago, a plant I had not watered in months, which was probably beyond recovery, a building I had not seen in 2 years, a street I had grown up on and left and been trying to get back to for a long time, the way you try to get back to something when you are not sure what you are trying to return to exactly, only that you called it done and meant it. I had called it done. Gerald's channel opened again, just for a moment. The light patterns were brief. The translator produced 4 words. Where do we go? I sat with the question. There was a long list of answers. Gerald had given me parts of it during the past 3 days. Locations where the Voth had established positions. Systems where the old wars had left damage that was still settling 200,000 years later. Places where the lines that the last commander had drawn were beginning to blur without someone to hold them. The map of it was enormous, the kind of enormous that you could spend a lifetime working through. I checked my jacket pocket. Left side inside. Empty. I had expected to feel the absence more than I did. Gerald, I said. The light patterns opened. North, I said. It was not a real direction. He knew that. It was a human word for somewhere forward from here, which was the best I had at the moment, and Gerald had been collecting human concepts for 3 days with the enthusiasm of someone who had not had new information in 200,000 years. The translation came back after a moment. North, he said, like it was a word he intended to keep. I stood up. The stars did not rearrange themselves. I walked back toward the Harbinger. There was a plant in Chicago that was probably dead. There were things behind me that were finished. There were things ahead that had not started yet. I did not call it hope. I was not built for hope. I called it the next scheduled thing, which is a different kind of word for the same direction. North. We went north.